my thought about today is two things. One is that I would ask you some of your perspectives on the boys' issues and boy crisis. I do a little bit of sharing with you about some of the things that I've observed in my 20 years of research on this issue about why boys are in crisis. And one of my thoughts is that at this point in time, there are about 17 million moms and dads who have boys who are in troubled mode, obesity, ADHD, doing things like video game addiction, porn, and just sort of destroying their lives, becoming a failure to launch. And they're really concerned about their boys, but oftentimes they're ashamed to talk about what's going on because they don't want to be advertising to somebody else that their son is not doing well. And so I've seen so many moms and dads who are like looking for somebody that understands and articulates the issues that boys are going through so they don't have to feel so alone and so ashamed. But no one has done that at this point. And in the Democratic Party, we focus so much on women's issues and girls' issues, which because I was on the board of NOW, I'm so totally supportive of. But I've also seen boys deteriorating all around the world, and somebody that needs to stand up for that. And so I hope this is a wonderful opportunity for somebody to stand out and say, hey, we support girls and women because we're Democrats. People get that, but also saying that we also support everything that's going on in the family that needs help. And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that and get your perspectives, feelings, and thoughts about that.
Well, first, I recognize when you have a book like this that obviously is changing people's perception of a national and obviously international issue, how much work goes. A book doesn't look like that big, but the thousands of hours of reading and discussions and that it takes to distill a complex issue. So I used to say on behalf of the state of Colorado. Now, even though I'm just running for president, I can say on behalf of the United States of America.
Yes.
Thank you for that effort.
Thank you.
And I certainly, in my own history, my dad just after I turned 8, my father passed away. And I was the 4th child, and my mother that was her second husband who died. Her first husband died at the end of World War II, and she had 2 kids. And she remarried my dad, and everything was great, and he was funny and gregarious, and then he got cancer, and after 3 difficult years, passed away in 1960. And with me at least, and I remember I didn't feel like I didn't feel like a traumatic loss. I mean, he basically, as he got sicker, we saw him less and less, so he just disengaged. But I grew up with no self-confidence. I grew up hating the way I looked, so that I learned to comb my hair, tie a necktie, without ever looking in a mirror. And this whole process, and it was a funny thing, it's one of those cruel ironies that if I am incredibly extroverted, but if you have no confidence, if you're insecure, then you become shy.
Yes.
And so I desperately wanted to go over to the kids next door when they were playing basketball and play with them and introduce myself, but I just couldn't. And so I would watch with this sense of longing and this sense that I wasn't, in some way wasn't good enough. And that process of kind of discovery took, most of my adult life in a funny way. And all along the way, there were various father figures that actually helped me grow into an awareness of that I was more than what I thought I had been in a funny way. And I think I hadn't really thought about it until Dottie Lamb told me about your book, that my father's death probably had something to do with that.
Yes. Who are the father figures? Can you share with us a little bit about the father figures that were helpful in giving you confidence in either who they were and what they say?
Sure. So it was, in funny ways, my Little League baseball coach. I loved sports. I was very, very competitive. I wasn't the best athlete, but I think I was the most driven.
Most motivated.
The most motivated always. I won the award in high school for the person who makes the most of their ability, which is a very nice way of saying the person who tries the hardest.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, my mother was the eldest of 5 daughters, and her father, who had always wanted a son, became a father figure to me, and I think my older brother as well. So we had him and a couple of uncles who were fairly involved. But then also teachers in school. I had a 6th grade teacher named Mr. Miller. I can't remember his first name. But he was, how those things stay with you. He took the time to kind of talk to me and go out of his way. There was a guy named, my best friend was a kid named Bobby Littlewood, and his father, who always smoked cigars, and he worked at a big kind of a woolen a company along the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia that dyed fabric, different colors, so it was kind of dirty, messy, and he always had a big cigar. But he went out of his way to give me a Christmas present every year because he knew that I wasn't getting anything from a father. So he tried to pick out something that a boy would especially like.
Wow.
So again, people kind of fill in the gaps.
Yes, very nice. Yasmina, do you have anything to say or ask?
Oh, I was gonna ask the same question that you already asked him. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about, I'm a single mother, and I was raised by a single mother, and this is unfortunately it's a very common thing in the African American community. As you know, I'm sure you know, from slavery time, separating the man from the woman, and then, into Jim Crow, and then the welfare state. There's been, consistently in the history of, Black people in America, of the separating of the wife from the father of her children, and but I was thinking as you were talking about my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Bromley, and how he had such a big effect on my self-esteem. And I was remembering my mom saying, I've been telling you that since you were born, and why all of a sudden do you believe it now that Mr. Bromley is telling you? So it's just really interesting. My background is as a relationship coach, and more in the biological than the psychological realm, but how some things are kind of wired in, even as we change and grow as a nation and as a species. There's things that over thousands of years, there's some different ways that we develop, and what are the ways that our father or men kind of help us to with our confidence, the way that as feminists we've really supported girls so well. I think we're doing really well as a nation, and just really going on the right path with how we're supporting women and girls to have confidence and to get out there and be everything we want. But my question for you is, what do you think that we can do as a nation, especially you if you're elected, in terms of helping our boys to know what kinds of ways that they can really matter, in terms of being a father?
Right. Oh, that's such a tough question. It's a good question. But I think part of it is to make sure we provide, government's role is always going to be somewhat peripheral to that essential relationship between a father and a son. But one of the things we did in Colorado was look at our inmates in our prisons and made sure that if they had fallen behind in their support payments, if they were separated from the mother of their child and not connected to their children, we would reduce the payments. We'd let them get down to almost zero because we wanted to make sure that connection was there. And for a long time, our judicial process consciously separated fathers who weren't making enough money from the kids because they weren't providing the full support. So we just drew a line and said, well, then now you're bad. You're somehow, and that of course made men angry, and sometimes that anger was directed at their ex-wife or the mother of the child or their child. So we tried to really push back on that and encourage them to create more support. We made a priority to make sure that fathers who were in prison and about to get out, that we made sure they had a priority standing in getting job training. In other words, so that they would have, if as much as humanly possible, a good opportunity to reconnect with their family. We changed our whole human services. We called it 2Gen, and that you're never going to really address some of the ills and challenges of society without looking at multiple generations, right? At least 2 and then sometimes 3 generations. This is often the case. in broken homes.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Do you see, you were reading a few moments ago about the concept of a White House Council on Boys and Men, and I'm in favor of keeping government as small as possible, but I also saw that there's our school shooters, our mass shooters, they're not only boys, but dad-deprived boys, almost more than 90%. And the ISIS recruits are more than 90% dad-deprived boys and girls. By the way, the smaller percentage of girls that are ISIS recruits are also dad-deprived. And then, of course, our criminal population, 93% males, more than 90% of them are dad-deprived. And so my feeling is that if we're focusing, this is one time when we can get something like a White House Council on Boys and Men to reduce the size of government, because the more we have the presence of dads, the more we have the absence of government, because it's about $1 trillion expense per year that we have on just those three issues alone, all the ramifications of those issues. Any thoughts about that?
Well, absolutely. I think a White House Council on Boys and Men would be a huge force multiplier. I think you'd get the payback millions of times. I'd never seen those statistics. More than 90% of the recruits to ISIS or the long-term convicts and the school shooters. It's not surprising. One of my security officers, when I was a mayor of Denver, had a son who actually helped me move. I knew him well. He was an actor at the community college. Went with the group to what they call to Edinburgh, Scotland, for what they call I think it's the Fringe Circuit. It's a big
festival.
Big festival.
Edinburgh Festival. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Edinburgh Festival.
All these things.
That's me who knows these things.
Yes, exactly.
But his father always worked, and they spent time together. But he ended up in the basement just watching video games, and ended up with another guy when he was 19, and with another kid who was 19, and they sold cars over several weekends and broke into homes, and they were a police officer chasing them, and this kid who'd never had a speeding ticket, was reaching out the window and shooting back at the police officer, and one of them hit the cowling of the windshield, not the actual windshield, but a piece of chrome got into the police officer's wrist, and he had to have several operations. Anyway, that kid who'd never done anything wrong in his life they gave him a minimum of 40 years before he's even eligible for parole. And it was clear, and I know his father so well, and his father felt so guilty that he had not been there.
Yes.
And while the kid was in the basement playing these video games, he wasn't out there saying, hey, let's go hunting, or let's go fishing, or let's retune the engine.
Connect.
Let's connect, let's do something together. And it's, I think, a council on boys and men in the White House, you look at the power that John Kennedy had with the President's Physical Fitness Council, which is another thing that should be lifted up and promoted aggressively. But those symbolic things don't have to have a big government bureaucracy. What they have to do is they have to have roots that go out to every state, every county, every municipality to build awareness more than anything else, but also provide resources. One of our big rural economic development proposals has been to find in smaller towns abandoned buildings, historic buildings, and renovate them, or where necessary build a new building, but have community centers. Because in a funny way, what we need is more activities that boys can do with their fathers, or in absence of fathers, with father figures. With boys. And we have this huge issue now with outdoor recreation. We become the number one center for outdoor recreation. No one pays attention.
Really?
No one pays attention. So we have their national convention now, comes to Denver twice a year. It's got in 2017, it was an $887 billion industry in the United States. And it keeps us healthier, but it is a powerful connector for fathers and kids, right? Whether you're going out hiking or bicycling, it's just all those outdoor activities are a great way to transcend that generational divide.
Absolutely. And pickup team sports are really well known for being able to prepare boys to be good entrepreneurs, because you don't have any idea who you're sort of connecting with at first, and you decide who you can connect with as you would when you create a corporation.
That's so interesting.
Isn't that interesting? And then, do we play half court, full court? What are the rules? If you say to me, pass the ball to me, are you just saying that as an ego person, or are you really knowing you have the best shot? And my learning about, what is true and what isn't true, there's nobody telling you do or don't do this or that. You're discovering yourself, what to do, what not to do. That's a really good preparation.
And here we've been cutting out team sports from schools all over, and getting rid of recess, getting rid of physical activity in every way. It's so funny. So I never knew I was an entrepreneur. I came out to Colorado as a geologist. I thought I'd be a geologist forever, working for a big company. And of course, I got the price of commodities tanked, and I got laid off along with thousands of other geologists in the 80s. And I ended up opening a restaurant that brews its own beer, one of the first brew pubs in America. And it turned out, I knew the first day when I walked in, it took us 2 years to raise the money. My mother wouldn't invest. No one knew what a brew pub was, so they thought I was crazy. And we finally got open, and I knew that first day when I walked in that I would be better at this than ever, anything I've ever done in my life, much better than I was a geologist. And I became this serial entrepreneur. I opened 20 businesses. I created over 1,000 jobs. And we opened these brew pubs all over the Midwest in always abandoned buildings and forgotten parts of downtown to try and create community. And we'd always have local operators and local partners. We'd put up half the money, but we'd raise half of it locally. And it was just this exactly what you're describing. And I was the nut for team sports. So I was the one on Saturday morning, I'd call around and get someone to bring a friend or someone else to put together the touch football teams and make sure they were fair. I would negotiate. Actually, up until a few years ago, the dean of the University of Chicago Law School was a young man, or now a middle-aged man, named Douglas Baird. And Douglas Baird's older brother, Harry, was my best friend. They lived across the street and 5 doors down. And we would play wiffle ball or kickball or touch football all summer long, every day. They had a big backyard. And at the end of every day, I believe that the wind was blowing in and the wiffle ball got stuck high up in the hedge where it was normally a ground rule double. I thought the wind was blowing in, maybe it should be a triple. But I discussed it with everyone because I thought we should be fair. Anyway, somehow they seemed to believe that those negotiations always seemed to benefit me. So every day when Douglas Baird would go back and come back and talk to his parents, his mother would say, "Well, Doug, did you learn any new Hicken loopholes today?"
Nice.
And so he uses it to this day in his lecture on contracts. A basic part of introductory law is that any contract involves language, and that language can be manipulated and interpreted differently. The same words can be interpreted by the different people in different ways. And I try to play down the Hicken loopholes business when I was as someone in government. We don't believe in loopholes.
Yes, exactly. Chris, do you have any questions?
Yeah, it's really inspiring to hear how you grew into that, and you were just telling us a moment ago how you were the kid that was afraid to introduce himself to the neighbors, right? And how important it was that you had these people in your life that invested in you, that were these buffering adults, as some say, that they're to help to pick you up and cultivate the potential that you have. And that's a big blessing. Not everyone in this country gets that, right? There's so many kids who, and young men in particular, who may not have those relationships. And it seems critical that we find a way to cultivate those as a nation. And I'm curious to know what we might do to see that more young men have those kinds of people in their lives.
No, and that is such a great point. We've been working actually for the last several years with the Markle Foundation in New York, and in their original partnership with LinkedIn, and now Microsoft bought LinkedIn, so now it's Microsoft. But we created something called skillful.com. And originally the goal was to make sure kids of all ages can learn skills as they go through life, because automation, artificial intelligence, all these professions are going to disappear, just like my geology profession disappeared. And so we wanted to make sure there was a platform by which kids could learn skills. Over the last couple of years, we've realized that what we need is more mentors. And in terms of learning which skills and how to succeed as you go through high school and into whether it's community college or whether you just go straight into work, right? 66% of our kids aren't going to get a 4-year degree, and we've done nothing for them. So this whole notion of mentors, we're trying to create best practices. So we did this in Colorado as the template, and now we're doing it in, I think it's 22 other states have now taking this skillful.com model. But it is mentors. And we used to look at, we have the Boys and Girls Clubs, we have rec centers in the city of Denver. There are all these places that try to do it. But it's it's uncoordinated, and there aren't really the best practices that maybe that's a place that the federal government and a White House office on boys and men could really establish those best practices, and how do we get them out?
Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Again, he passes me the right after you say exactly what I was going to ask about. But yes, go ahead.
You sure? No, go, you finish.
We were talking at breakfast, and we were talking about different crises that have happened that nobody paid attention to until it was really, really bad. You know, like the AIDS crisis, the opioid crisis. There's some shame underneath. There was like this way of shaming, like these boys are feeling like there's something wrong with them, and a lot of parents all over the country are thinking it's just them. It's just their son, or it's just their school, or their neighborhood, but it's top to bottom, everyone in the country. And I'm so thrilled that you're looking at this. I just want to make one comment, which is based on the last things that you were saying. I hope that you as governor, and hopefully you as president, will continue to work on these things. And this issue of ADHD, and ADHD, I feel, is like, it's also a way of pathologizing certain things that are natural to boys.
Totally agree.
Having high energy, having an entrepreneurial spirit, the things that have made us America. And I love the way that you're talking about the things that you've already done in your state, and I hope that you're successful in the nation at doing those things. So it's not a question, but
no. But
that's all I
the
wanted to
two
say.
things that and I'm moderately dyslexic. I'm not bad, but I'm a very slow reader. All through high school, people thought I was lazy, which maybe that was true a little bit too. But
Yeah.
I don't think so.
no, I was a little lazy as a teenager. But that is so interesting that so often dyslexia has some component of ADHD, which I always I joke about it being a kind of a cruel irony. You know, it's like being extroverted, like I am, and also shy,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But if you're a slow reader and then you have a short attention span on top of that, it's like God decided you would never read a book. In a funny way, I also think that as someone without confidence, you know, if you are deprived of a father, and you don't have that sense of confidence, you become, I don't know, I felt like I was a magnet for bullies. And certainly I remember third grade vividly. I was the butt of everyone's joke, but there were one or two kids that really always kind of started it. And it was, you know, I was a skinny kid. I had really thick glasses until the miracle of LASIK surgery. I had these, it looked like the bottom of Coke bottles, just thick.
Yes, yes.
You know, so you see the side of my head way in when you look through the lenses. And that having to already have low self-confidence and then to be bullied just makes you further shrink into yourself,
Yes.
which means that you attract more bullies.
Yes.
And I think that's the other part that any counsel on boys and men would have to begin looking at. How do you, within mentorships
Yes.
and all those different availabilities, make sure that we have more opportunities for kids of all ages to recognize how damaging bullies are.
Very good. I want to close in a few minutes because I know your assistant is saying you're getting ready to move on. But a few things I wanted to share along those lines that for you to take away, perhaps. Sure. One is like in Japan, they have about 25% of their students are in vocational education tracks. And so that prevents boys from dropping out of high school. 99.6% of those students get jobs immediately after their vocational education graduation. The other thing I discovered was dad-style parenting and how different it is from mom-style parenting, and how important dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting put together are for kids. That the tension between dads and moms over roughhousing and letting kids climb on trees or go on things, that there actually is an actual purpose to that tension, if you will. So, for example, dads will oftentimes like wrestle, and moms will think, I feel like I have only one more child to monitor here, But dads know that that roughhousing gives them a bond with the child. that then creates their ability to enforce a boundary and say, okay, you can win at the roughhousing by sticking your elbow in your sister's eye, and then letting the children return to roughhousing and have the children repeat the negative behavior and then end the roughhousing based on the negative behavior. That now we have data showing that teaches the children it mandates for the children to think of their sisters and brothers' needs, which starts the empathy process going. And it also teaches the children the difference between being assertive and aggressive. And so when you know the difference between being assertive and aggressive, and you have that boundary enforcement to require you to be empathetic, that leads to children having more friends in school, being less depressed at school, and being able to to focus on their schoolwork, not failing, not creating depression, withdrawal, suicide, and then being so angry at their lives that they step into the mass shootings.
That's so interesting. It makes perfect sense. It's
Yes.
it's fully just what you would expect.
Yes.
And yet we obviously
We don't think about it.
we haven't thought about it, and in so many cases are derelict, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you have a? Here we good.
Sure.
Were you raised by a father and a mother?
Yes, and grandparents until I was 13 years old.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so I really got to see firsthand.
You had the full house.
Yes, yeah, and there's a drive now for me to see how we can start to cultivate the kind of communities that provide the sort of support that I received for other people in this country. Because it just seems so critical. And one thing that really had my attention for some time is the school shootings that have been taking place, and the mass shootings. And to me, it seems like a larger systemic issue of our society. And I'm sure you've had a lot of time to think about this. I'm curious to know what you see as the root cause of this issue that we have, particularly within the heart, mind, and souls of these young men who are doing this.
Sure. I mean, and kids shooting kids.
Yeah.
Is really the most horrific thing, and we've had so many school shootings. I mean, if you were a foreign hostile government and you wanted, what was the worst thing you could do to damage America? You might make children scared to go learn,
Exactly.
scared to go to
Yes.
school, and I think as in most cases, the causes of major problems are usually several things coming together at one time, and just like solutions are always not just one thing, but multifaceted. But I think that the media, I mean, has helped create this. I call it a crisis of division. Right? When I talk politically, I say, President Trump is not the disease; he's the symptom.
Yes.
He's so divisive. He it seems like he's intentionally trying to divide people, but the crisis of division has been going on for 30 and 40 years. So somehow it's the polarization of our media and having right-wing TV shows and left-wing TV shows and everyone kind of going to their corner and then getting it reinforced again and again. I think social media, like Facebook, has exaggerated that polarization and that division. But I think there's, there are probably other causes I haven't even seen. I have to read the book. I'm sure there are other causes in there that you probably uncovered. I think, and I have no data on this, but I often worry that affluence creates a certain polarization. In other words, people aren't as focused on the absolute essentials. I was raised by a single mom raising 4 kids, and there wasn't a lot of time to have to get into fights and bicker all the time.
Your statement about affluence is really fascinating because the boy crisis is in the 56 largest developed nations where the ability to master survival is good enough so that the families have the option for divorce that they never had before and the option for raising children without a dad that they never had before.
Interesting.
And so it's in those 56 nations that boys are falling behind girls in every single academic subject, but it's every single academic subject, and especially reading and writing, which are the 2 biggest predictors of success.
Isn't that wild?
And that's it. And that's where the depression, the suicide, all of that is floating out of those 2 things. And it's not all divorced families, and it's not all single mom families. It is the single mom families where there's no dad involved, and the divorced families where there's minimal or no dad involvement. That's where the challenges are really the strongest.
It's amazing. What amazing data in that, and I feel so blessed. My son's just going to his senior year, and he's a great student. He's like, you know, he's gotten, I mean, I never got an A in high school my whole life, and so he's done that. I mean, he's succeeded in every academic way there is, so at least I think like any dad, I feel like oftentimes I haven't spent anywhere near enough time with my son, but at least by that measure, and hopefully by the other measures, we've succeeded.
You have such warmth in your eyes,
Yeah.
and such, I'm sure your son feels very supported by you.
Thank you, Governor.
Oh,
I don't want your
Yasmina.
team to kill you, but we are looking forward to a long-term relationship with you. So do your homework, and we hope that we'll stay in touch. And because you know this is a really important issue. Is this something that you'd be willing to work with us on long-term?
I'm sold. I mean, what you're doing is you're taking.
Now you can go.
You're knitting together all the threads that are out there and
Yes,
putting them into a coherent, with a bunch of information that I didn't know.
Oh, I'm so happy. And
And
by the way, the book is an audiobook too, so if dyslexia is a challenge for you, you know, that might
yep.
be.
Although my problem is when I'm in a car or when I'm, you know, have a chance to, I'm usually someone's calling me.
Yes,
Someone's
yes.
trying to explain something to me audially as well. So
Exactly.
it's really a time issue as well as it's a
It to-
dyslexic
it
issue.
totally is.
But I will read it. Trust me. I've got Dottie sent me so I have a copy of the book.
Oh, that's great. It's really been a pleasure to
No,
to meet
what a
you and
treat.
talk- For me too.
You bet.
Really.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Nice to meet you both. All.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.